But face whispering is basically the study of micro expressions. It was identified back in the late 1960s by a gentleman called Dr. Paul Ekman. And he identified that irrelevant of our age, our race, our gender, our culture, in fact, even if we're born blind, we use the same combination of 43 muscles in our face to demonstrate the same 7 human emotions. And that our emotional brain responds 24 times faster than our thinking brain. So by the time we think don't show the emotion, it's already out there.
Welcome to the Power of Respect podcast with Charlie Leichtweis, author of the book, The Power of Respect in Business. Charlie is one of America's foremost authorities on respect and leadership development. And now, here's Charlie.
My guest today is Adele Randall. She is a best-selling author, award-winning speaker, and CEO of her own consulting practice, Authentic Achievements. Kim is coming to you today from outside of London, England, where she resides with her family. Kim has a unique approach to advising leaders based on lifelong learnings focused on reading people to engage them and to enable them to be successful. I'm pleased to introduce and welcome Kim. So good to be with you today, Kim.
Oh, I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
You know, as we think about respect and the words and things that you use in communication and other things, I came across your challenge series, and I'd like you to maybe share with the audience what your challenge series is about and how it works, and maybe how you see that as helping people with the concept of respect.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So I'm currently doing a 30-day challenge to push me out of my comfort zone, to get me to take my own medicine. You know, I tell my clients all of the time that they've got to do something every day that scares them and they've got to change their thinking. And I realized I wasn't walking my talk. So the 30-day challenge is to get uncomfortable. So I go live every morning, which terrifies the living daylights out of me. And in it, I share something that I've been doing probably for about the last 15 years, which is to start the day first with a quote to help me pick my mindset, and second with a question to get me to think differently, because we get ourselves stuck in a rut of the questions that we ask. So trying to change, one of the things I've been working on really hard for the last couple of years is changing judgment for curiosity. So we immediately, when somebody's talking, we immediately make a decision on it, don't we? We're like, oh, well, I think they're right, I think they're wrong, I think they're this, I think they're that. So I try and get myself to suspend judgment and go, I wonder why they think that. I wonder what they can see that I can't see. Let me ask more questions about that. And I wonder why I think that I'm right. So what's making me cause this piece? Because as leaders, we often get wedded to being right. We don't want to appear to be wrong, because then people might judge us and find us lacking. But if we can remove the need to be right and actually just be more interested in the outcome rather than who owns the outcome, and become passionately curious, I've seen it be the catapult to people's success, because we're now seeking to understand. And at our base, I believe every human being wants to be listened to, they want to be understood, and they want to be respected. That doesn't mean to say we can't ever disagree, but we just don't disrespect. And if we can create that for everybody we come into contact with, the world really is our oyster.
No, that's so true. And in that concept, you talk about the value of questions. And so as I think about the value of questions, it actually helps us pause in our own mind, as you suggested, from thinking we know the answer to really finding out what the question is before we try to answer it. A friend of mine told me a long time ago, if you listen longer, you'll be in a position where you may find what you originally assumed was not where they're going. The other benefit, of course, as you mentioned, is you'll realize, or the person you're talking to will realize, that you actually are listening to them. And that form of respect causes an engagement level that is the benefit for both folks involved in the conversation. So as you think about the value of questions, what are some examples of some valuable type of questions perhaps that you've thought about over time?
Yeah, I love what you've just said, Charlie. So resonates. And I think for me, one of the important things about our question is, are we seeking to understand? So understanding that some of the way we phrase a question can actually impact the outcome of the other end of the question. So if we say, well, why did you do that, Charlie? It can come across as being a bit judgmental. It might pass on the fact that I've got a difference of opinion to you because I've used the question why. If instead I swapped that for what makes that important to you, Charlie, I've moved it from a potential to judge to one of seeking purely to understand, of wanting to just try and see what's happening in your world. So I think when we ask questions, trying to use the whole spectrum, I use a snippet from Rudyard Kipling, which is, I always get this one wrong. I have 6 serving men who've taught me all I know. Their names are what and when and if and why and where and who. And if you can broaden your questioning bank to actually ask it from all of those angles, we live in a world of polarity. So for every up, there's a down. For every left, there's a right. We know that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So the more questions we can ask, changing those words to allow us to just keep moving around slightly so that we can start to see the 360 of what's true, allows us to really unlock the potential of where we're going. So for me, one of the things I've spent 20 years doing is gathering questions, spotting those moments where you ask something and it creates that eureka moment and writing it down. That's a good one. I'll keep that for later.
Yeah, no, actually, writing things down would help because when I tilt my head, everything falls out. So I got to put it somewhere where I don't lose it. Amazingly to me, and very interestingly to me, you have a concept that kind of goes along with what you just said called face whisperer. Can you explain what that is to our audience and give some examples?
Of course, yeah. So whenever I tell people what face whisperer does, they immediately start holding their face and not wanting to talk to me anymore. So I promise everybody I'm not doing it right now. But face whispering is basically the study of micro expressions. It was identified back in the late 1960s by a gentleman called Dr. Paul Ekman. And he identified that irrelevant of our age, our race, our gender, our culture, in fact, even if we're born blind, we use the same combination of 43 muscles in our face to demonstrate the same 7 human emotions. And that our emotional brain responds 24 times faster than our thinking brain. So by the time we think, don't show the emotion, it's already out there. So learning to understand those is not to call people out and go, you look angry, or you look sad, or you look anxious, but to ask better questions to create a better space. So let me give you an example. If I'm delivering some training and I look across the room and anybody in it looks angry, particularly if it's the person that's booked me, I will take pause. I won't say you look angry because that's confrontational. I'll say, before we move on to the next piece, can I just check, is this delivering everything you expected it to? Or was anybody expecting something else? What you do is you create a safe space for the person to go, I thought you'd cover this. Of course we can. We were coming to that next. But it allows you to do that. Or if you're in a board meeting, which I sit in all the time, and you see that somebody's anxious, instead of calling, again, you wouldn't call them out and go, you look anxious. Go, can I just check, before we finish, has everybody got what they need today to thrive? Or is there anything I could do to make today easier for you? You create that safe space for somebody to go, I could really do with a word, or I could really do with your support, or I could really do with advice. But again, it's done in a way where they're not going to feel uncomfortable. They've not been called out about it. You're just making that a nice place for everybody to say what they need.
You know, that's so important because, you know, as I believe that leadership is an equal emphasis on results and relationships. And I think, you know, technology today has certainly helped us identify and measure results in ways we never even dreamed of. But the relationship side of it is not so easy and not so containerized. What you've described are some really unique techniques to improve our relationship side. It's not about everybody agreeing all the time. It's not about only hanging out with people you do like or agree, but it's how do you bridge that communication gap? How do you find out where the needs are of everybody, including yourself, and are they connecting in the conversation?
Absolutely. And I think for me, it's about finding the commonality, even with people where we're disagreeing on something, there'll be some common ground, there'll be something else that we're doing. And there's an amazing book that I recommend to everybody. I should be on commission because I literally recommend it to everybody, but it's called Crucial Conversations, and it talks about how in life, whether that's in business, in our relationships, or just in every day, there'll be moments when we have a conversation that becomes crucial. And by that, what they mean is this emotion that gets involved in that. Either one or both parties is feeling some kind of fear of being sold to, fear of being made to look wrong, fear of being made to look silly, fear of whatever it is. There's fear in there. And what happens is when we're fearful, we respond with either violence or silence. And by that, what I mean is the violence means we get assertive, we get aggressive, we might get angry, we'll get louder. A bit like playing Pictionary with my best friend. You don't get it to start off with, she underlines it. And I'm like, no, I can see it. I just don't know what it is. You're going to need to use different words. But we see people do that, repeating themselves louder. The alternative is we go silent. We withdraw from the conversation. We stick our head in the sand and we hope it all goes away. Neither one of those actually resolves the situation. So instead, what it talks about is how you can use 5 simple steps to reframe any conversation to be able to find a solution that works for everybody. And I love these 5 steps. If it's okay, I'll share them now with you and your audience. Sure. So yes. The first one is that you should share some vulnerability. When we're in that place where actually we're fearful, the person thinks we're trying to attack them. So being able to share some vulnerability, like, I really don't want to have this conversation, or I feel conflicted about bringing this up, or, sometimes if I'm dealing with, with particular members of the family, it might be I'd rather stick my head in the oven than have this conversation, but I'm going to need to. But being able to share that actually you're not enjoying this either. This isn't because you've come to attack, but there's a purpose. So share that vulnerability. The second one is explain why you're doing it. So I really don't want to have this, but I know I need to, because at the moment you're getting in your own way, or you're doing this that's going to cause a problem to another family member, or we're not able to move forward and achieve the goal because of this. So we've got to address it. We can't carry on as we are. And then the third step is you state your intention. And the one I use all of the time, because it genuinely is what I want in life, is I'm 100% committed to finding a solution that works for both of us. And the reason why that's always my one is it allows me to not have to do something that doesn't work for me. Equally, it doesn't make me make somebody do something that doesn't work for them. So we have to work that little bit harder to find something that works for both of us. But we've now got commonality. We've got a common ground. So I can give them a suggestion and say, here's something I think might work. And if they come back and go, that just wouldn't work for me, Kim, it's like, that's fine, because let's come back to our intention. Our intention is to find a solution that works for both of us. So how might you consider we could get through this? However many iterations of that you need to go through, there's no longer any emotion involved, because you've got an agreed common ground that you're working towards. And then your 5th step is to agree whichever action it is you're going to take, and then take it. I've used that effectively on board transformation just as much as I've used it effectively handling childcare with an ex. So you can see how it works in whatever situation that you find yourself faced with.
Sure. No, that's a very good point. And what strikes me about that is it's hard to do. It takes an intention on our parts to try to do that as often as possible. And as human beings, we're going to fail at it from time to time. And so one of the quotes you have, I think it's on your website, perhaps, it's not the mistake, it's what we do with it. And so I think that that's an important concept to keep in mind as we try these things and we try to improve at them. But in terms of it's not the mistake, it's what we do with it. So if you could say some more about that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think, we all make mistakes. We are perfectly imperfect. We're chasing a dream of perfection that doesn't exist. Our imperfection is our perfection. So we'll get it wrong. And as I try and explain to my little girl, she's 5, when we get things wrong, it's about learning from that. It's about apologizing. letting people know, I don't believe anybody sets out to get it wrong. Nobody gets up in the morning and goes, I wonder how to be really rubbish today. I wonder how to irritate everybody I come into contact with, or how to really annoy my boss. So I know there's exceptions to every rule, but in the main, I believe people try and get it right. So now when I deal with anybody that is getting it wrong, I start with what I think they were trying to do. So I believe you were trying to do the right thing. I believe you were trying to help the company achieve its goals. I believe you were trying to be the most effective member of the board. They're like, yeah, I was, because they meant to get it right. So brilliant, because that's what we want you to do. What I need to chat to you about is, whilst that's what I wanted you to do, it's not actually what happened. So how can we help align your impact with your intent? And a lot of that comes from owning up to your mistakes, being able to go back and say, I didn't mean to cause offence, but I can see now that I did, or I didn't mean, to totally mess up. I do it with my little girl all the time. I didn't mean to shout at you. I lost my temper 56 times of asking you to eat your dinner was mummy's limit, but she shouldn't actually have shouted. She should have found an alternative way of helping you understand what it was that we needed and where we went to. So because we're all learning, and I do that with my little girl just as much as I do it with everybody else, is saying, I think there's one 3-letter word that I believe is life-changing. And I use this with my little girl all the time. We use labels. So we'll say, I'm not good at this. I'm not able to do this. I'm not good at colouring. The 3-letter word that I always say to her is the life-changing one is yet. I'm not good at this yet. I'm not good at colouring yet. I've not got a multi-million-pound business yet. Whenever we add that word into whatever we're telling ourselves or whatever we're telling anybody else, we open our subconscious mind to the art of the possible. For able to look at, they want that because they've said not yet, not ever. So I'm going to now look for ways to help them achieve it. I'm going to bring opportunities into their forefront of their mind for them to be able to achieve that goal. So I think whenever you find yourself saying something about you are good at something or you're not good at something, putting that yet piece in really can be the life-changing difference to help you go on and succeed.
I think that point of helping people point to the future or the next step can get people out of a lot of different sort of ruts they might get into, or worse, relative to how they feel about the situation. And it's important for us as human beings to realize, if I've made a mistake, and as you say, embrace it, be vulnerable about it, even as leaders, and yet say to ourselves, it's not the end of the world. I will go on and try to do better. And my philosophy, if people can improve, 5% more, just think how much better things will be in terms of communicating, respecting others. So it's not about perfection, as we all know. I'm going to turn another one of your questions on you. What's the greatest lesson you learned from something that went wrong?
Oh, wow. So many, Charlie, to be fair, I've had so many things that have gone wrong. I believe in life, you look at things and everything is a lesson, a blessing, or both. So when I don't feel like I'm being blessed, I look for the lesson, because I promise you it's always in there. But for me, one of the biggest lessons I learned was to stop worrying about being right, to stop needing that to be important. I would sit in board meetings, and I talk to people now all the time about this, and I'd say something and it might not land. And then 2 minutes later, somebody'd say exactly what I'd said in slightly different words. And everyone would be like, oh my God, that's ingenious. And I'd sit there going, I said that. I'm so indignant. But I realised that actually it wasn't important. It wasn't important that I got the credit for it. It was important that we moved it forward. So once I learned that actually that wasn't the measure of whether or not I was successful, the measure of whether or not I was successful was whether or not I helped people reach their potential. So actually, could I make sure it's a bizarre chimism, so forgive me for this, but I used to measure days when we come out of those meetings, we've all had them, that were just a nightmare and you didn't add any value. And I used to say they were a total waste of makeup. And my lesson is to make sure that I don't leave anybody thinking that the interaction was a total waste of their makeup. So how can I ensure that people leave with a feeling of increase, even if it's just you were able to share a compliment with them. I'm British. We're terrible. We're very stiff upper lip, and we don't go out there and do something. I'm the weirdo on the tube that will go up to people and go, "You look really lovely today," or "Your hair looks really nice." Only if I genuinely mean it, but actually don't think it and don't say it, because that might just be the thing they need for them to have that feeling of increase and pass it on to somebody else. And I think it was Morgan Freeman that said, "How do we change the world? One random act of kindness at a time." So I think that's been my lesson, is what random act of kindness can I do right here, right now, and take the chance.
And that's acceptable for people to do. It doesn't diminish us in any way. In fact, to your point, it enhances us over time, certainly. You brought up a fascinating idea here where you just described, and I think it's fascinating because I totally understand it. The element of being in a meeting and saying something and then someone else says it slightly differently and all of a sudden they're brilliant and you're going, wait a minute, wasn't that my idea? And then to your point, that's not the point, whether it was my idea or not. It's the point that if the ideas are starting to come together, it's important for us to then embrace that and be part of how helping get that done. And people will notice that as much, I think. They may not recognize it at the time, or you may not feel they do, but they will over time. I've been in many meetings over the years where, and we're talking about leadership element, people that are in leadership roles or aspiring to, and we as leaders tend to be sort of aggressive animals at times relative to wanting to be recognized, wanting to be right, as you say, and when we're in those meetings, someone makes a presentation, and sometimes others in the room take it upon them to show how smart they are by saying what's wrong with what the other person did, as opposed to how do you support it or help improve it. And even though that doesn't get noticed immediately, over time, I think it's a very valuable lesson. It's not about you being smart because someone else is wrong or made a mistake. It's about how do you support, to your point, how do you support them in that process and help them make it better?
Absolutely. I love that point, Charlie, because I think I think it was a very competitive landscape. I spent my first 25 plus years in financial services. I mean, it was a little bit cutthroat, and you saw it all the time. People's biggest fear that they would be found wrong, and one of the easiest ways to get out of that is to divert attention. It's like, my house might be burning, but look over there. I mean, that house, wowzers, that's where you need to send the fire engine. But actually, instead, taking it to a place where you go, how do I help? How do I leave them with a feeling of increase? And the other thing that I've learned is, if I tell you something, it's propaganda. If you tell yourself something, it's gospel, because as adults, we don't check our data source. So we've got so convinced that we're right. And it's uncomfortable, isn't it? Having to make the move from, I was saying that this was black, you were saying it was white, and I now realize that it's white. I've got to move away from that. It's how we create an environment where people can make that change without having to be wrong, without it having to be the hair shirt example, because we do live in that world of polarity. We might just be looking at it from a different point of view. So helping bridge from where the person is to where you need them to be in a kind way can be a real game changer. Instead of saying, well, I think you're wrong, you can go, I'd never thought of it like that. That's really interesting. One thing that springs to my mind, and I'd really welcome your opinion on it, is I'd been viewing it from over here. How might that work with what you're suggesting? So that what you're doing is respecting their opinion. You're inviting them in so that they can then kindly to themselves also go, I'd not really considered that. Yeah, you're right. From over there, I can see how what I'm suggesting might not work. Well, hold on, let's work together then. What's the route through? How do we find the path that comes out of that? And that's why we'll see, I'm sure we'll all have had examples of this, where somebody might have said something that we might have initially thought was a silly idea. But if we're really honest, it is the foundation of what ended up being the right answer. Now, the right answer might have been way over here, so it doesn't bear a huge amount of resemblance, but it allowed people to question in a different way, allowed them to use different parts of their brain, and that is what came up with the great answer. So I always say there's no such thing as a silly question, because or a silly idea, because all of them prompt us to think, and anything that prompts us to think allows us to start to see the art of the possible.
No, and in that story, I like your point. Is, I didn't think of that as, as you feel somebody says something. I didn't think of it that way. I wasn't looking at it that way. It reminds me of a story that I actually included in my book about a teacher talking to a class, and they asked, "What are the color of apples?" And one of the little kids raised their hand. Oh, and one kid was right in front of the teacher, trying to be really aggressive to get in. The teacher went away from them because they figured that was a disastrous answer. And they said, "What do you say?" And Mary says, "They're red." And he goes, "Oh, correct." Someone else raised their hand and said, "What do you say?" "They're green." And they said, "Correct." In the meantime, the students, so eagerly wanting to be answered, finally got called on, and they said, "Apples are white." And the teacher said, "I don't know of any white apples." And they said, "Well, they're white on the inside." And so it was just, listen deeper into the conversation and look for why didn't I think of that, or what does it mean that they thought of that?
I love that story, Charlie. That's amazing, because it is, as children, we've got such curiosity. We've got curious minds. We look at things. I was giving a speech actually yesterday, and we were talking just about this. If you're a kid, the sofa can in 1 minute be a princess castle, and a minute later it's a pirate ship, and then we're on a train, and they absolutely believe it. They're not wedded to the fact that we look at the sofa and go, it's a sofa, which is what we do as adults. So it's kind of, how do we tap back in to that curiosity, to that imagination? I think it was Albert Einstein that said, "I'm not particularly intelligent, I'm just passionately curious." And I think for me, that's the piece that I really want to encourage people to do more of. I try and encourage my little girl, and I try and use her curiosity to help me re-engage with mine, because I realized I lost curiosity. I got to that place where 25 years in corporate life, I thought I knew. And I was like, Kim, you don't know. And my nan used to say to me, every day's a school day. You should learn something every day. So in every day, I look for the lesson.
No,
and
that's
you find
terrific. And I think, I think of your comment on the challenge and how life changes when we start a day with a quote and a question. It can trigger that kind of, rekindle that curiosity, if you will, so that you're looking deeper and longer into things. So important of a life lesson. So what are some of the most important I know you've talked about a number, but what are some of the most important takeaways about respect and leadership that you've learned during your career, if you could kind of characterize that?
Yeah, so I guess for me, one of the biggest lessons that I learned as a leader actually goes back to one of my biggest challenges. So I started my career as a hairdresser, and I carried that with me as my Achilles heel through the next 20 odd years. I was convinced that someone would find out that they'd put the hairdresser on the board and they'd go, "It's a bit awkward, get her off. She's got no qualifications. She doesn't know what she's doing. She shouldn't be here." And yet now I realise that the greatest lesson I ever learned about leadership, I learned as a hairdresser. They taught us to listen, really listen to what the person is trying to achieve. Help them to achieve it, and leave them feeling the best version of themselves. Well, that's leadership. Good leadership is
Absolutely.
just those three. So it took me a long time. I'd learnt the lesson and not realised it. But I now realise, looking back, that is what made me good at what I did. It's what got me to get progressed onto a board despite not meeting any of their criteria. I can't remember the amount of times when I went into meetings where I'd been put forward as a future leader or been promoted on something, to find people sucking their teeth at the fact that I'd got no degree and I'd not got any A-levels. And sometimes the MBQ in hairdressing just didn't land it for them. They were like, really? This is what we've got. But once I was able to really work on, actually, how have I been a good leader? Why have you wanted to work for me? I've managed 7 major redundancy programs in my career, which are the most heartbreaking things to ever do. And I'm proud to say I did all of them without a single grievance and without a single tribunal. And I went and questioned that. I was like, why? These are the most hideous things in the world to do. And they said, because you did it with respect. You looked at it from how we might be feeling. You came and asked us what you could do to make it better, and treated us with that respect so that we understood what was going on. So I think for me, they're the parts. It's about being comfortable, being vulnerable. I've my greatest lesson was that my vulnerability can be my superpower. It's about learning how to share vulnerability without losing credibility. And I think once we do that, once we realize that actually it's okay to be a bit vulnerable, it's okay to say, do you know what, I'm not perfect. I'm going to get things wrong. I'm not going to know every answer. In fact, actually, what I do is I recruit people that are better than me at all the things I'm bad at. Because if I didn't, I wouldn't be a very good leader, because we'd have gaps all over the place where none of us are any good at it. And that's going to be what holds us back. So I think it was embracing that imperfection.
No, absolutely. And from those lifelong learnings, you've become a best-selling author, award-winning speaker, a CEO of your own consulting practice, board member, etc. So, and in so doing, and with your intention of helping others, and that, I think, is the life lesson: finding your way, the way you can help others, and the things you've learned that you can then turn around and help others with. So, maybe is there somebody, maybe a leader that most influenced you, or anything along those lines?
Yeah, I've had a few, but one of the core ones that I always come back to is a gentleman called Paul Stobart, and he was the CEO of Sage when I first met him, and he had such an ability to connect with people, to create a really compelling story that you wanted to be part of. And I think what he taught me was that was the art of leadership, creating that compelling story, to bring people in. And you probably won't forgive me for the analogy, but this is my analogy of how I bring to life what he did. It was almost like he recognized that his role was to direct the play, and that he'd bring people in to that play. So he would hire you in to play a part, and then he'd let you play it. He wouldn't tell you how to play it. A bit like, if you were going out and directing a movie and you had Helen Mirren or George Clooney or Brad Pitt or Julia Roberts or Oprah Winfrey, you're not going to tell them how to play the part. You're trusting that they've got the skill and the ability to bring the part to life and play it amazingly. He did the same with his people. Was he'd say, this is the role I want you to play, now play it your way. And that was inspiring to see. He had time for everybody. It didn't matter how busy he was. He would always make time, if you were walking through, to say hello to everybody he met. And that humanity, that honesty, people literally would walk through fire for him, because he treated them with respect. He didn't demand respect. He commanded respect. You couldn't fail but to respect him, because of the fact that he was willing to share his vulnerability, to create a safe space, but to be genuinely interested in the people that worked for him. And I aspire every day to be anywhere near as good as he is.
No, that's terrific. And, the way you've tried to do that has certainly been helpful to a lot of folks. And, we could go on forever here. In fact, I hope maybe we'll have another episode down the road as well. But I thank you for your time and sharing your insights. I think it's most valuable. The stories that we have in our podcast don't necessarily relate or to everyone that listens, but I'm sure there's people out there that will relate to some of the stories that we've talked about today. And that's our goal, to reach out and touch at least one or two people to improve the overall relationship building of ourselves and the people we're around. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, thank you, Charlie, for having me. It's been an absolute delight, and I really appreciate the opportunity to chat and look forward to doing it again.
Thank you. I want to thank Kim Adele Randall for being with us today, and I especially want to thank you for listening to this episode of the Power of Respect podcast. If you like what you heard today, please consider sharing the podcast and visit our website, expertsinhow.com. A quick reminder, if you'd like to read my book, The Power of Respect in Business, it's available on Amazon. Thanks again for listening, and remember, respect builds trust, trust builds relationships, and relationships are the key to leadership. Thank you.
This has been the Power of Respect podcast with Charlie Leichtweis, author of the book, The Power of Respect in Business. To listen to more episodes and to learn about Charlie's leadership development programs, visit his website, expertsinhow.com.